Welcome to Israel Update, and it's already episode 9. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and with me, as usual, though without a tie, is Mike Doran in Washington, D.C. Did I scare you, Mike?
No, I feel like maybe I let the team down. Will you forgive me?
Did you just realize you were without a tie, or did you consciously do this?
I consciously made the decision, but then I forgot about it.
This is Mike from the Hudson Institute, and we will submit a formal complaint about the tie issue. There was a press conference yesterday with Netanyahu, and we'll be discussing it and also showing a piece of it with English subtitles. But the reason I'm bringing it up is that all the press, the next morning, the hostile press said that this was 2 against 1, meaning Netanyahu isolated, and against him are the Minister of Defense, Mr. Yoav Gallant, and Benny Gantz, one of the heads of the opposition parties. And the press noted at the end they did not shake hands. Alas, they did shake hands, only they didn't show it. But the press was all over it because in the midst of a war, they can't let go of their lifelong mission, which is to get rid of Netanyahu. Very inappropriate when soldiers are fighting in Gaza. What do we have on our show today? We'll give you an update of what's going on the ground in Gaza as the IDF is closing on the Shifa hospital. There was a summit in Riyadh, very interesting. The first time that the Raisi, the Iranian president, is in Riyadh since they renewed diplomatic relations. Nasrallah of Hezbollah gave a second speech, and we'll also discuss Netanyahu's press conference. And we have an exclusive today with Dr. Baratz, an amazing story on how leftist, radical, anti-Israeli organizations influence what's on the ground. It gets all the way to the White House and influences the how should I call it, the gun distribution of the Biden administration in the territories. More about that later, but first, Mike, the headlines.
So, Gadi, there are 5 main headlines. The IDF is continuing to press ahead in the ground operation in the Gaza Strip. It's actually going very well. They're in the heart of the Strip, and they have surrounded on 3 sides the Shifa hospital, which is, of course, the headquarters of Hamas in the north for sure. IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari yesterday denied that Israel had either attacked the hospital or completely surrounded it, both of which are true. That's because he's responding to propaganda coming out saying that they are attacking the hospital and that they have put it under siege. The second headline, Hezbollah appears to be escalating the war in the north. It attacked 6 linesmen who were repairing overhead wires. 5 of those 6 men are in serious condition in the hospital, and the 6th was mortally wounded. In addition, Hamas fired a volley of rockets from Hezbollah territory into the north, reaching 1 or 2 of them reaching as far south as Haifa rockets. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday in a press conference that Israel is going to, quote, retain overall security, unquote, over the Gaza Strip after the war. He broadly hinted that Israel would not agree to the Palestinian Authority, at least in its current form, taking power there. Speaking about a post-war Gaza, Netanyahu said, there will be no civilian authority that educates their children to hate Israel, to kill Israelis, to destroy the state of Israel. There can't be an authority there that pays the families of murderers. There needs to be something else there, unquote. A U.S. National Security Council coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa, Brett McGurk. By the way, that's a position I had once in the White House. He's scheduled to visit Europe and the Middle East, including Israel this coming week. McGurk will discuss the war in Gaza with Israeli officials and American allies, European and Middle Eastern. And he'll also try to advance a deal that might lead to the release of several dozen hostages. Finally, President Erdogan of Turkey called Israel, quote unquote, a baby killer state. And he said that he would work with Iran to help Gaza, and he's invited Iranian President Raisi to Turkey in November. Over to you, Gadi.
Very interesting, that last bit of information, because the summit in Riyadh also points in another direction, but we'll be talking about this in the geopolitical section of this show. And of course, Turkey, whatever is your absolute expertise. And
well, it's my great concern. And this is, I don't like the direction here, unfortunately.
And so let's begin with the update. We have a very nice map that's actually an aerial photograph. And as you see, the blue, which is where the IDF is widening, especially this closing of the strip area. And this is the Shifa hospital, which is the headquarters of Hamas. Mike, tell us, what does it look like right now?
Well, in terms of the ground operation by the Israelis is going extremely well, as far as we can tell. There's still a lot of fog of war, but this looks like it is going very much according to plan, and it has put Hamas in terrible straits here, because this is their headquarters in the north, the Shifa hospital. Underneath it, there's an incredible complex of underground bunkers from which they carry out the command and control of the Hamas leadership, carries out the command and control of the north. Of course, it's covered by a hospital, so the whole world, including the foreign minister of Australia, is focusing in on the fact that it's a hospital and that Israel has surrounded it. You'll see that they have not totally surrounded it. They could if they wanted. They're leaving a space, an opening there, so that that the civilians in the hospital and around the hospital can get out to the humanitarian corridor, which isn't shown on here, but it allows people to go south.
Let's show the map with the humanitarian corridor, which is less exciting but informative. So the humanitarian corridor is, are you seeing it now, Mike?
Yes, yeah, I can see it clearly.
Okay, so I can. The humanitarian corridor is this yellow line, and so people can get out through Gaza City. This is the whole urban environment. It's a very big city, and they can go, and there's a window every day for the exodus here,
which the Israeli spokesman in Arabic publishes and makes clear. And there's all kinds of ways to contact the Israelis if people cannot get through there. So
as we've said before, the IDF is securing the humanitarian corridor against Hamas attack on its own civilians in an attempt to have them remain not just in the Shifa hospital area, but in Gaza City at large, so they can serve Hamas as human shields for against Israel. Yeah.
But every day, more and more civilians are taking advantage of that evacuation corridor. It's a great embarrassment to Hamas, because it shows that they are really losing control. And Gadi, my impression is that they are absolutely losing control in the north. And I expect that within days, the Israelis, within the end of the next week, I think we're going to have a totally different picture in North Gaza.
How do you think the Shifa hospital conundrum can be solved? Because on the one hand, the international law is clearly on Israel's side. If it's a very valuable military target, then any civilians put in harm's way, the war crime here is committed by Hamas. On the other hand, the pictures of sick people being evacuated from rubble are extremely damaging to.
They're showing pictures of babies taken out from incubators. They have doctors calling up European doctors calling European radio stations, Arab doctors calling Arab radio stations. There was
it's an info war. It's
an info war, and a very effective one. The undersecretary of the Ministry of Health for Gaza called out today to an Arab radio station, and he said the bodies of our martyrs are being eaten by dogs in the street, by stray dogs in the street, and we can't do anything about it because we're under siege here in Shifa Hospital by the Israelis.
I'll tell you one anecdote about the way Hamas treats this propaganda war, because of course Hamas is it's not a democratic society, and they don't mind faking or lying about anything. So there was I have a personal experience with this, because while back in 2018 in April, there were the return marches where crowds just walked onto the fence of the border, and there was serious concern in Israel that they would breach the fence. In retrospect, they might have been working gradually to lower our threshold of alert and get us used to the fact that people are near the fences. Israel at that point used snipers who shot mostly at people's knees and picked up the Hamas operatives actually quite effectively. But then there was a big scandal that started in the New York Times, that of course was translated in Haaretz, about an 8-month-old baby. I remember her name, Laila El Gandour, who died from a smoke grenade. Allegedly died from a smoke grenade thrown by the IDF. The press didn't ask what a baby is doing in a war zone. Of course, it blamed Israel for killing a baby. But it later turned out that this baby died of heart failure in a hospital and was brought to the fence dead in order to create this story. And of course, if you saw the picture in the New York Times, I didn't think of it before, or I would have dug it up. It showed the baby it was like the Pietà, it was baby Jesus, and it showed Mary, her mother, holding her, and everything was symbolically from Bethlehem, and it was all a staged lie. So much so because the record was found later that Hamas eventually removed her from the list of the dead. And I'm recounting this story just to say that Hamas that nothing that Hamas puts out can be trusted in any way.
No, but it's highly but lots of people are being killed. Lots of children are being killed, and it's highly effective. There's no doubt about it. So the Israelis have a dilemma here. They need to take the headquarters of Hamas, because it is the headquarters of Hamas. Number one. Number two, they also want to demonstrate conclusively to all of the Palestinians in the north, especially, that they have taken it. They also need to demonstrate to the world that this propaganda campaign by Hamas, which is designed not to save civilians, but to preserve the terrorist infrastructure, they have to show that will not work. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, if they go and bomb the hospital, the outrage around the world will be
directed at Israel. And we might as well mention that the press is performing a role that's serving the terrorists here, because instead of insisting that they put innocent civilians in harm's way, they're blaming Israel for targeting civilians as if these civilians were actually targeted, which they were not. The target.
And there is a role actually for the outside world to play in putting pressure on Hamas and helping to evacuate these people from Shifa Hospital and down to the south. Give them a roof over their heads, and warm meals in the south and so forth. And I know a lot of people would like to do that, but of course Hamas also prevents that.
Okay, let's zoom out to the bigger.
Before we do, can I tell you one little thing I learned? You may already know, which is interesting about what we're talking about. Do you know the story about Yahya Sinwar and his brain tumor?
Yeah, that was treated in Israel.
Yes, he was saved. So the head of Hamas, who is in a bunker in Khan Yunis right now, he was treated by a doctor in Israel. His life was saved by this doctor when he was detained by Israel. He was imprisoned by Israel for years, and while in prison, he got a brain tumor and was saved. But did you hear about the doctor's niece or nephew?
No.
The doctor's niece or I may have the relationship wrong, but a family member of the doctor was killed in the south on October 7th. So it's quite an amazing story. I need to find out. This is the kind of information that Israel, the kind of in the information war Israel is not putting out, about the how it put its humanity, how people feel now about the humanitarian side that they showed. Also, when those all of those workers that were let in from Gaza to work in Israel, Israel thought it was improving relations with Gazans when the Hamas used them as spies to.
Because our military establishment and our security establishment, like the American security establishment, thinks about the enemy in our own terms. And so we assume that we understand what are the incentives and the deterrents, and we don't. And the problem remains that we don't take our enemies seriously enough. It's certainly true of America, that refuses to understand that when the mullahs of Tehran say death to America, they mean it, and if they could do it, they would. And we too think that the Hamas charter claiming that it's a religious commandment to kill Jews is propaganda, and in the end they're all people and they want their children to grow. There's a whole speech by Obama on how this is true. Everyone in the end wants to make a living and return home in the evening and raise their children. And apparently some religious fanatics actually want their children to be martyrs.
This is what Islam and Americanism have in common. In Islam, the people believe that you're born a Muslim and then you are educated away from it. And Americans believe that inside every human being is a little American trying to get out.
Yeah, we saw how that works when what happens to this in foreign policy is that Americans tend to think that the American Constitution is the solution to everything.
Right.
So if it could just be taken as a template and imposed on everybody, then it's universal. They don't understand that it's American.
I'm laughing because when I first went to college, I thought that. When I first started studying the Middle East, I thought, the Arab world, I thought, how come they don't just have the United States of the Arab? Like, our Constitution would solve all of this.
Yeah, in historiography.
I had to consciously think myself out of that thought process.
In historiography, it's called The Tragedy of American History. It's a famous book by William Appleby Williams. Mike, let's zoom out into geopolitics because
so
in Riyadh,
I think it's Appleman.
William Appleman Williams.
Yes, Applebee's is a.
I said Appleby. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, geopolitics, a summit in Riyadh. I've been anxious to discuss this with you because it looked very impressive when it began, but it seemed to have ended in a whimper. Let's try to lay it out. This was a huge event.
It was a huge event, and there was an attempt to come to some kind of unified position on Gaza, and in the end, they couldn't come up with anything. So anything that is going to have a serious impact on what's happening on the ground,
because the interests are not aligned. You mentioned in one of our previous episodes that the Saudis can't say this, but they're not going to be happy if Hamas survives this.
No, they can't say it, but every American ally who's watching this sees behind Hamas Iran, and they see the United States as a wobbly superpower. So if the United States will not help Israel, its greatest ally, defeat an Iranian proxy, then they will conclude that the United States will not help anyone do this. And the United States really wants Iran to win. And they will then hedge further toward Iran and toward China.
but what seems to be happening, at least in this summit in Riyadh, is that something, the shadow of the Abraham Accord seems to still be have an imprint, despite the fact that its main anchor in the United States has more or less disappeared, because the Sunni states are just maneuvering away from the strong Iranian position on Hamas.
They're maneuvering away. Let me stress though that I sometimes make the mistake of reading things purely in terms of state interest. Emotion and sentiment matters here, and I don't think we should go so far as to say that emotions in Riyadh aren't running high either. I don't know any. I don't know any in any Muslim country with where sympathy for the Gazans has not increased significantly during this conflict. Even in Azerbaijan, which I think is the Muslim majority country that is really closest to Israel and who sees its strategic interests as really bound up with Israel, has a multi-decade relationship with it and so on. I can feel in the Azerbaijani statements and so on some unease here. So I want to say that as a caveat, but in terms of state interest, yes, they understand where their interests are, and they're maneuvering away from the Iranians. So the Turks are playing a slightly different game.
We'll get to the Turks in a minute, but maybe I'll try another way of phrasing it. The Iranians, if indeed the Iranians chose the timing, then they threw this bowling ball of the Palestinian problem into the forming coalition of the Abraham Accords plus Saudi Arabia. They meant to break this coalition up and regroup the anti-Israeli forces as they were traditionally behind the Palestinians. And it looked like the ball hit and all the pins just dispersed. But it does look like some of them are at least edging towards their former positions. And I'll put it to you this way: is the Saudi-Israeli rapprochement becoming more or less feasible if Israel decisively wins a victory over Hamas?
If Israel decisively wins over Hamas, then the chances of Saudi-Israeli rapprochement increase significantly. There's no doubt about it. But we have to wait and see. They may still be set back by this for all kinds of reasons. By the way, I just want to make a little statement, a little footnote. I no longer believe that Iran planned this. We can discuss this at a later time. I'm seeing more and more indications that Iran and Hezbollah were a bit surprised by this. I think it's in their interest, broadly speaking, but I don't think there was a grand plan like I originally did.
Interesting, and I'll write this footnote on the side to be discussed in future episodes. But we promised to say something about, how do you say the name of the country now?
Turkey,
because Turkey refused to join in a commercial boycott on Israel. So while you quoted very, very harsh language that they employ about Israel being a child killer state, they are not willing to break diplomatic relations or commercial relations.
Yeah, what President Erdogan has done is he has taken a rhetorically very harsh position, and he has broken permanently relations with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said he'll never meet with him, and I believe he never ever will. So the relationship will be run through the permanent bureaucracy, through the intel, through maybe President Erdogan occasionally talking to President Herzog, but there will be no relationship with Netanyahu. Having said that, the Iranians demanded directly that he break the commercial relationship. That means Azerbaijani oil, for example, comes to Israel through Turkey. He refused to do that. The other thing he did, there was
what's the reason behind the refusal?
because I think that he understands that that Iran is a rival of Turkey as well, and he does not want to. He doesn't want to play the Iranian game 100%, and that there are good state interests. There are good state interests to Turks are all about the state, and there are very powerful state interests that militate in favor of maintaining relations with both sides here.
We will now go to the interview with Doran. I'll make an introduction, and after that we'll go to an excerpt from Netanyahu's press conference yesterday, which we prepared for you with English subtitles, not for you, Mike, because you understand Hebrew perfectly, but for our viewers. And I'll show you how it connects, because it ties into conversations we've had here before. And
I wish I understood Hebrew perfectly. I have to look up at least one word in every tweet of yours.
Usually the slang acronyms, but you to keep up with my tweets, Mike, in Hebrew. Yeah, I'm always worried about people who follow me in English. They have to withstand a barrage of 100-to-1 Hebrew to English ratio. So here is an amazing story, which you'll understand from this conversation with Dr. Ran Baratz. Dr. Ran Baratz is the founder and chief editor of Midah, Israel's leading conservative website, with which I am affiliated to. And Ran is now involved in the I guess in American slang you'd call it militias, although it's small cities. Why you're laughing? Because it's
I'm
not.
I'm laughing because
it's not the militia from the War of Independence in America.
No, but also there was a whole militia movement here. Militia doesn't have a great ring to it these days. So
what he's involved in doing is actually self-defense in little towns and villages, in case that there will be some mass attacks from neighboring Arab villages and towns. And this ties into, strangely, a campaign that's been going on for years to demonize the settlers. It's called the Settler Violence Campaign, and European countries pay a great deal of money to anti-Israeli NGOs, which go under the cover of human rights, but actually demonize Israel for a living, to demonize specifically the settlers. So while the settlers are victims of hundreds of terror attacks, they are demonized as the problem in Judea and Samaria. And this the influence of this, you can trace it. There's actually a book that traces it, goes from these NGOs, which produce propaganda, much of it, by the way, false, and other things taken out of context and exaggerated, probably a grain of truth here and there, goes all the way, their influence goes all the way to Parliament, where they hold discussions about this, and then left-wing politicians are in touch with American politicians, and you'll see how this ends up in this conversation with Dr. Ran Baratz. Hello, Ran. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Gadi. How are you these days?
As we say here, Shlomi keshlom ami. I'm doing like my people is. You hear it from many. You are incredibly busy, and what you're busy with is organizing the self-defense for Jewish towns and villages. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, terror, anyone who knows anything about the history of terror knows that there is some sort of a proclivity to imitate. Once a terror attack is successful, then you have a lot of copycats. So one of the things that we are worried about is that the model of attacking a village by, rather not a small force, like a bigger force, not just an infiltration, but trying to occupy a Jewish village and for several hours, and then doing all the horrors that we've seen in Be'eri, in Faraza, and other villages in the south, is going to be attempted in Judea and Samaria, and also in Israel. Just all over we have hundreds of small towns and villages, and they almost all of them are nearby large Arab populations, some of whom are Hamas supporters and Hamas terrorists.
And
So
you're talking
this,
both in Judea and Samaria and in Israel proper, both.
yeah, definitely. And
you don't trust the army to do it?
So we've seen that if it happens in several locations, it takes the army some time to get there. And so you have to think that a village will have to stand by itself, opposing this attack for, let's say, a minimum of 20, 30 minutes, which is a long time. But even if it happens simultaneously in several locations, it can be 2 hours, 3 hours. In the south, it was by surprise. So it took sometimes 8 and 10 hours. So what we're doing is forming something like, small platoons in each village that will be able to, of volunteers. People my age, people who are too old to be active reservists, but who can still fight and give the first responders for an attack from each village locally. So we supply them with firearms, we train them. This is a metaphor. This is not a partisan thing, right? This is done by the police and by the IDF itself. So what we realized that we have to supply the villages with a first response to a military attack or a military-like attack that can happen because of imitations of terrorists. This is something that is pretty regular in the history of terror.
And let's try to untangle the complicated connection between this and the malicious campaign entitled Settler Violence. Tell us a little bit what this campaign is.
Gadi, first, we have to get the statistics right.
Yeah.
The settlers' violence, when it happens and when it is recorded and we can do something, we punish it, is non-existent compared to Palestinian violence towards settlers. It's very unsafe to travel in many areas in Judea and Samaria. You can be attacked by either stone to gunfire, and the more than 99% of settler villages and towns and people are completely law-abiding and non-violent, and are looking even for some sort of partnership with the Arabs who live next to them. This is just a small, like I said, a few hotspots, well known, well documented, well observed, and punished when necessary. So the picture is that settlers suffer from incredible violence whenever they go out of their towns or villages. And since the war began in Gaza, it has become more dangerous for settlers, not for Arabs, much more dangerous for settlers, including in army bases who are attacked now with, like you say, Molotov bottles and even bombs.
So how does that influence the ability of towns and villages to protect themselves?
So, like I said, we everyone in Israel, not just in Judea and Samaria, everyone in Israel are now much more aware of the fact that we need to be first responders on military terms, not just medicine or fire, but also an actual attack that can take place. So we are building those small platoons in villages and in neighborhoods, in towns, and under the police, under the IDF, all very regulated and legal. But we've learned a few days ago that the US refuses to supply M16s, which is, it's an outdated rifle. It's decommissioned all over the world, including in the US Army. It's the rifle that was introduced in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War. So we have
the M16, you mean?
M16, yeah. It's an old rifle. We get some of it through the American military aid, but they sanctioned giving the small platoons in settlements, in villages in Judea and Samaria. They are not allowed to defend themselves using those rifles. It's a crazy, crazy thing. And
all this because they bought the whole settler violence propaganda and just assume that the danger in Judea and Samaria is from the settlers, not to the settlers.
It's so ridiculous. But listen, it's not only immoral, because you can't say to an Israeli, right, if you live on that side of the green line, then you are allowed to protect yourself with rifles that we get from the American military aid. But if you live on the other side of the green line, then they should be able
Then
to
you
kill
can't
you.
defend yourself.
Yeah, it's also, practically speaking, very, very foolish, because the chance that there will be an attack increases if you are perceived as defenseless. If we have, practicing trained platoons in small villages in Judea and Samaria, the likelihood of the attack decreases. And what do the Americans think will happen if a village will be attacked in Judea and Samaria? Do you think that they think that Israel will do nothing? There will be a huge military campaign in Judea and Samaria during the war. This would be far, incredibly detrimental to everything that the Americans are trying to build here. Give all Israelis in all of Israel, all the relevant areas, the ability to defend themselves, and you will stabilize the area. What they're doing is destabilizing Judea and Samaria because they refuse to allow them to protect themselves. Crazy policy. I've never seen anything similar, really.
Dr. Baratz, thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you, Gadi.
Gadi, this is reminds me of the power of social media. You sometimes just one image can color your sense of what's happening in the big picture. My impression is that actually settler violence is down this year compared to last year. I saw some statistics not too long ago about it. Can't cite them for you, but it just takes one or two pictures of a clash between settlers to make people feel like this is the big problem. But there is a high political motive behind all of this. The State Department, the Biden administration wants to go back to the two-state solution. They've already said it clearly. They want to put pressure on Israel. They want to raise the Palestine question on the agenda, elevate it on the agenda, and this is part of their campaign to do that.
And so they are framing the issue in this way in order to influence the settlement after the war, which in their vision would include giving control in Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, thus having a united Palestinian Authority to deal with which you can cut a deal for a two-state solution, which is completely unrealistic now, because neither the Palestinians nor the Israeli dream of any partition at this point. And what is worse, the Fatah is applauding Hamas's terror attacks.
And I used to believe that the settler problem was the cause of the conflict, that the settler movement was. And I actually, Gadi, you're going to be very disappointed with me. When I was in the White House in 2005, I played a role in the Gaza withdrawal, and I truly believed that the withdrawal was going to stabilize things rather than destabilize it. So.
I believe that too at the time. So we wouldn't have had a fight between us at that time. We would just have an argument with our former selves, apparently. But demonizing the settlers takes the focus away from the fact that Palestinians are terrorizing the settlers and slaughtering many of them in Judea and Samaria, and it's no different. It's no different. The only reason that Hamas is not in control of Judea and Samaria too is that the IDF is there, and that Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian Authority is preventing an election, because even recent polls show that Hamas would have won. In fact, Hamas's yukra. Mike, I'm missing a word here.
It's not reputation. Prestige. There we go.
Prestige has just gone up in the eyes of the population in Judea and Samaria. So while the State Department and the Biden administration are maneuvering towards a two-state solution and handing over the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, Netanyahu is putting his foot in the other direction. Let's hear what he says here about a friend of his who lost his son.
אני הזכרתי את יחיאל לייטר. אתה יודע, דיברתי איתו הערב. והוא אמר לי, ראש הממשלה, ביבי, אני איבדתי את בני בכורי. עבר עכשיו קורס בגדים במילואים בהצטיינות. אב ל6. איש מדהים. אני מבקש לך רק דבר אחד. שהוא לא ייפול לשווא. שתשלימו את המלאכה. ואמרתי לו, יחיאל, אני נשבע לך. זה מה שנעשה. וכדי לעשות את זה, השלמת המלאכה אומרת שביום שאחרי חמאס לא יוכל לקום שם חמאס אחר. את זה אנחנו נבטיח גם כן.
I think the prime minister here is speaking to all Israelis and sending a very clear statement of purpose to all Israelis. But I think he's also speaking to the Americans about exactly what we were just talking about, this two-state solution. He has already beginning the argument with the Americans about what comes after. And I read in the bulletin the statement where he said that it has to be something different. It has to be something different. Cannot be the Palestinian Authority that takes over there.
And he repeatedly said that Israel retain security control for the foreseeable future. He said this in many variations, including his interview at Fox. Well, this is all from us for today. We'll be with you again on Wednesday. And the way this is developing, we have much on our plate for every episode.
Israel's winning, Gadi. I don't know that I said it was going well, the ground war. I think for the first time I see Israel is winning. And I believe that Israel is going to win this unless America comes in and stops them.
And that can still happen. So there's going to be much pressure to withstand. Thank you, Mr. Dr. Mike Doran in Washington, D.C. I am Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and thank you all for watching.